part of the thing of God always being he for me was the fact that as a woman, I don't see myself there. And people would say, well, there's Mary, the mother of Jesus. But to be honest with you, Mary was scarce in the tradition I was raised in. It was really an all male cast, divine wise. And as a little girl, I didn't see myself. And if you add to that, that I was told I was sort of lesser than, it's difficult.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Free Radical Podcast. Today, I was gifted with the chance of meeting a very dear sister, newly discovered friend, Carmen Acevedo Butcher. Carmen is a poet, PhD scholar, a workshop leader. Her translations of The Cloud of Unknowing and Brother Lawrence's The Practice of the Presence won several awards. She has degrees in medieval studies from the University of Georgia and teaches in the college writing programs at the University of California, Berkeley. Carmen is also an affiliate faculty member at the CAC, the Center for Action and Contemplation. She lives in the Bay Area and is presently working on a chapbook of poetry and a translation. So for those who would like to contact her, here's the info. Her website is carmenbutcher.com. So we had a beautiful conversation. It was a whole journey talking about so many topics, talking about God as mystery, what will we mean by the cloud of unknowing, talking about the ever-evolvingness of reality and our role in it. We share very nicely in the context of translation, she being a translator, but how we can extend that to life itself, how to translate life in the language of love, and a very myriad of, at least for me, immersive and capturing topics. So I really think, hopefully, it will be the same for you. And so this is the Free Radical Podcast, and to support it, of course, please subscribe to our channel by clicking on the bell. And if you feel nourished by the conversation, like it, and share some words in the conversation section so we can continue this ongoing dialogue all together. So without further ado, dear friends, brothers and sisters, here is Carmen Acevedo Butcher. So Carmen, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us in the Free Radical Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Swami, for having me.
Thank you for being here, for being you. And I generally like to start, as you have seen some of our podcast, by asking or by sharing mostly to our audience how I got to meet with any guest I'm inviting, how I got to discover the particular jewel that I'm trying to invite to the conversation today. So you correct me because my memory is not always the best. On a personal level, I got to meet you first by reading your translation of The Cloud of Unknowing, and that in itself was impactful enough. And in a very general way, I knew of your connection with the CAC, the Center for Action and Contemplation. But eventually, very recently, a few weeks ago, actually, I listened to a conversation you had with Paul Swenson and Mike in the Everything Belongs podcast. And that was kind of the epiphany, so to say, that had the two of us here together, because I really felt you as and I don't want to embarrass you here in our recording, but I don't know, the word that can come is wonderful, but wonderful also in the sense of not like cliche, oh, you're wonderful, but you're wonderful. I feel that you are being full of wonder and full of passion and love for life. And despite so many intense dynamics throughout your timeline. So that was something that really touched me very deeply. And especially hearing your realizations in your role as a teacher, your willingness to remain open, to learn, even from your students and from everything, from nature in particular. And of course, as you know, that led me to write to Brian McLaren. And I dared to ask him, Brian, I listened to this beautiful conversation with this beautiful soul, and don't you mind if I can ask you her contact? So he was very kind to immediately I think after I want to do something and I return after 20 minutes and I find his email to the two of you and your reply to his email in 10 or 15 minutes. So that felt providential. And then we started to have an interaction till today for the last week, which basically was every single day, some message coming back and forth and sharing very, very beautifully. So yeah, here we are. So then my next question, which generally comes, is to my guest: what brings you here, Carmen? And why you have accepted the invitation besides your generosity and Brian's intervention? What brings you here today?
Well, I want to say first, Swami, that all that you have just said means a lot to me, because even though I've known you a short period of time, I just feel you are a brother and such a good friend already. So thank you for that heartfelt insight into what I hope to be evolving as. And I want to say the way it happened on my end was I was recovering from COVID. And as anyone who has had it and that last stage of when you're sort of getting better after taking the medicine, but you don't feel quite yourself. And I went to check my email, and there was an email from Brian, and an email from Brian McLaren is always a good thing. And I click on it in this sort of post-COVID haze, and it's to you and me. And I see your email, and your email and Brian's together were like vitamin D, like a bolus of vitamin D, sunshine in my life. And you had said such kind, heartfelt things. And then I bought your Radical Personalism and started reading, and you and I started having these conversations, but through the email. But the reason I said yes to begin with was like, Brian was like, hey, here is Swami. He's a great friend. And then I was just like, oh, I love learning ever since a child, because part of my family is Catholic, the Acevedos in Miami. And so I have since college studied all traditions, and to be in conversation with another tradition and to see where we are different and where we are similar, and to see where we're hoping to evolve and I just think, as Brian McLaren says, conversation is so important. So, and you have a childlikeness. So Swami, I don't want to embarrass you either, but you have got this prodigious intellect, and you've got this knowledge of different traditions. And, you love Carl Jung, which is one of my favorites. You write about Dionysius, the Areopagite. You have so many different traditions and so many great, like the perennial wisdom. And I was like, I jumped at the chance. So thank you. Thank you.
I had the hope that all the embarrassing praise came before the starting our recording, but no, it's still coming.
It is embarrassing, but I'm going to be joyful about it.
Yeah. If you're happy, I'm happy. I'm there to serve your joy. And it's humbling, so I accept that from that place. So thank you so much.
Me too.
For being here. So before Carmen go into what I will maybe consider the main theme of our meeting today, and somehow in connection to that, I was thinking you're especially renowned as a translator, and maybe for some uninformed people, to be a translator doesn't sound that fancy, so to say, or that complex, or something that requires such an investment of one's life, basically, literally, in the translation. And somehow I will say, being not a professional translator, but having to have translated text from Spanish to English and vice versa, I got a glimpse of what it implies to enter into that world. And by reading some of your books, and especially now recently your translator's note to the practice of presence that you very generously sent to me, where you clarify further details. All in the cloud of Unknowing, there is a lot of clarifications. And remember, there are lots of footnotes. I love footnotes. I'm a nerd like you. I remember you mentioned that as well.
Me too.
Yeah, so, but I mentioned that I have a further glimpse of how to translate. In one sense, I felt, okay, this is arguably harder work than just being a mere author, so to say, because it implies so much empathy. It's a great exercise. It implies so
Mm,
much living your own self-centeredness and just being willing to enter into the other person's world and invoking context, and being able to travel in time to the specific time and place, and really having that, again, empathy, that self-forgetfulness for the sake of experiencing the other person's world and life. And it's such an exercise of selfless dedication and love. And somehow, of course, something that comes to my mind in that connection is a beautiful point you made when you explained, while you are talking of your role as translator, and you mentioned the original meaning of the word respect, which I really love, which is look again or look anew, from the Latin new, anew, and specere, look at. So on that basis, I wonder how much, if to respect means to look anew, to be willing to rediscover everything and everyone, how much we are all meant to be translators in one way or another, in a deeper way, to translate reality always in the language of love, to learn to put the proper subtitles to what's going on in our life circumstances, and as such, how we always need to respect reality, to honor reality by always adopting the proper eyes. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or words in that connection, in your role as translator, and how that extends beyond the book, so to say, to the book of life, and so on and so forth.
That is beautifully said, Swami. That really captures all the ways I feel about everything you just said. It should be written down somewhere for me, because that captures everything I feel and have experienced about translation. And in many ways, to me, all of life is translating, as you say, that empathy, that feeling with. And I love the fact that you picked up on the respect, because every time I see that word, I think, look again, Carmen, look again. You know, you can't, a stereotype is formed from a glance and not looking again and staying with my own thoughts. But looking again is different. And what I love about translation and all the things you said is very similar also with our great contemporary novelist, Jhumpa Lahiri. She says that, because she has translated very award-winning books from the Italian into English. And she says that in the past, translation was seen as kind of a handmaiden to real literature and real writing. So I love what you said about translating is a bit almost harder than being, I forget how you worded it so well, but is challenging just as it is to be an author of a book. And she says the same. She says that translation is a real art. So I will say this. I had in graduate school this great linguistic professor who was a member of the Theosophical Society, John Aljo. He was very humble. He was a world-renowned linguist. And my first translation was of a 10th century Benedictine monk, Alfred of Inisham, from England. It wasn't really England then, but anyway, that area, the UK. And John Aljo, when I translated my PhD, John Aljo was my first audience as a translator. And he knew, I mean, you're talking about almost like God's eyes on your work. And I mean that with great respect and humility. He was both kind and he missed nothing. So when I translate, I'm always thinking, what would John think? Does that make sense? So on the one side, am I being true? Like you said, that empathy, like who was Brother Lawrence, who wrote, you know, so much of the practice of the presence? How can I relate to a man who never had anything, who was one of the not privileged 98% of his day? But I can try, I can study. And so you're right. It's like a friend of mine told me once, who is a counselor. And also when I've done spiritual direction and others who do spiritual direction, there's a part of you that sort of stands aside and lets the other person have the spotlight. It's like you're listening to but you have to kind of move. And when I'm translating, I literally have this feeling of kind of moving to the side a little bit so that the work and the person who originally wrote it can shine. So that's on the one hand. And this is and this is also our lives. So I like that you tied this to life, because this is also life. On the other hand, I'm thinking, how would my students relate to this in English? If I'm going to put this into English, what will the younger generation think? Like, will this be relatable to them, or will this? So how can I be true to both? And that really is listening, isn't it? Trying to hear what the other person is saying, and at the same time try to sort of bridge the gap. So I really appreciate you say that, because one of the things as a teacher is my greatest challenge is listening. Like, really, I often have this prayer, help me listen. Like, literally that short of a prayer, how can I listen? Like often, because it's very easy to think I'm listening and not to be listening.
Yeah, even if you make the prayer longer, then you stop listening and it's just you. So the shorter the prayer, the better to start listening.
Actually, that's exact. Can I just say, you sound exactly like, the cloud of unknowing. He's like, short prayers are best. Don't use too many words. Yes.
Wow. Thank you so much, Carmen. I really appreciate how you expanded on the notion of empathy. Interestingly, I'm part of a particular, we have formed some sort of alliance or family in our tradition with a group of like-minded friends, and we call that tadatmya in Sanskrit, and that means empathy, basically. So it's very, very interesting that the theme of empathy came through the idea of a translator, and I really love how you expanded the notion of empathy when I told you, okay, you have to empathize with the author of the book, the original author. That's one empathy, but this is a multi-empathic project, as you say, empathizing with the audience you are writing, or you are thinking how this person, I don't recall his name, who was with you in your PhD, what will he say? So that takes you to another form of empathy. So it's a multi-empathic project. So that's so empowering. Now, if that's done properly, and as you mentioned, I really love the other point that you made. As a translator, you try to allow proper light to shine on the author's intention. So your translator is kind of a facilitator. I like that word a lot. Also, you are doing something, but whatever you are doing is not getting in the way, but it's always to shed light onto something else and someone else, and not so much what I'm doing. So it's very humble by definition, that particular role. And the listening part, of course, that's one of my favorites. I always have this quote by Paul Tillich, who says, the first duty of love is to listen, right? In our own tradition, we'll say something like that. Sometimes we have some series of practices, like praising God and singing his name and remembering and serving and offering prostration, different practices. But the first one is Shravan, which means to listen. So if we are not there listening, everything else won't be unfolding as properly. So yeah, I really appreciated that different points you made to further expand our notion of what it means to be a translator. It makes me think of Julia Cameron, who wrote this book, The Artist's Way, and she tries to make the point. Some people may think, I'm not an artist, that's just for a few ones. Like she says, not everyone is an artist, but you need to find your way. So maybe you can write instead of the artist's way, the translator's way, showing how everyone is a translator. Everyone has to somehow engage in a form of it. So
I love that. I really do love that. No, that's beautiful, Swami. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm thinking in connection to your role as a translator, a few highlights that come to my mind in this precise moment that I read in the first part that I'm going through of the practice of the presence, when you, for example, emphasize this idea of how to address God, again, in a contemporary, not only age, but also considering the spirit of Brother Lawrence's mood at that time. And you try to make this point that he will refer to God in the plural in connection to the Trinity. But also you will translate words like at the time were expressed such as Lord, Master, King, more like friend, teacher, monarch, if I'm not mistaken. So I really appreciated that as well. I don't know if you have a few thoughts in terms of which are the challenges you face as a translator nowadays in terms of, specifically when speaking about God, how to talk about God, how to address God, how to define God in a way that does justice to who God is, whether female, male, plural, singular, and beyond that.
Well, I love how you put all that, Swami, because it's all true as part of my considerations. And one of the considerations I haven't talked about, and then we'll tell you what I think about the terms for God, is that I am always thinking, what are my own cognitive biases? So as a translator, one of the things I have to be aware of is, it's like with any researcher, when you're researching radical personalism, you're always aware, what are my own biases in this? What am I, what are the ways that I have a filter on my eyes that tends to see certain things certain ways because they match with what I'm thinking already.
Yeah.
And so it really is a spiritual practice, because that's what I'm trying to do throughout the day already. It's just with words and with books. But as far as God is concerned, it seems it's a topic around which I have great humility. So by that, I mean, I don't presume that I am someone saying this is what everyone should do. That is not at all part of my oeuvre. It's not what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I am someone who's part of the Christian tradition. I was born into it. I was born into the evangelical tradition. I eventually left that. And now I'm more in the mystical, sort of monastic, in a way, tradition. And because of that, I have certain experiences and even trauma associated with Christianity. And I have my own personal trauma as a child growing up. And so as I was growing up, women were not so much seen in church. They were mostly the ones who kept the nursery. They couldn't be in the pulpit. They cooked, they cleaned. And those are all good things to do. But as I got older, I wanted to be more of a person and not just a woman first, and kind of second class. And so there was a time period, given my traumas, where calling God he was painful. And I actually have learned since I thought it was just me and that I was very weird, and since then you read people like Roberta Bondi, the Emory theologian, and she wrote in one of her books how she had a difficult time with her father, as I did, and that she had a hard time calling God he because of that background. And I don't think people should be forced. I mean, life is all about healing, right, and love and such. So for a time there, because I have such a good, luckily, very fortunate, good friendship with my mother, who's very sweet, kind woman of deep faith, I thought, well, maybe I could call God she in my prayer. So I tried that. And then, eventually I met Julianne of Norwich, who does that. So it's like, I started learning that nothing that had happened to me was new, and then eventually I was like, well, can I not do both? And it's neither. It's both and neither. And so it became this big mystery. God is beyond pronouns. Well, also, I teach at UC Berkeley, and my students, some of them identify with the pronoun they, the pronoun series they, them, and I was thinking, what do they do? What do they do with just God as he? Okay, so then I start thinking, okay, can I translate this? And I know Richard Rohr does this sometimes. I know you are huge student and friend of Richard Rohr. And one of the things Richard Rohr will do is he'll try to repeat the word God rather than the he sometimes to make it more inclusive. And my good friend Mirabai Starr, who's an amazing translator and author, she will sometimes do for a time he for God and then she in the same book. So different people have worked with this to try to acknowledge that there's something bigger here. And when I looked at the practice of the presence with Brother Lawrence, people tend to classify his theology as he's talking about sinner versus saint and sinning, and
Mhm.
God is, God is this sort of rigid person, but he's not. He talks about us stumbling and how
Mhm.
God forgives us. He doesn't really come down. He doesn't come down on the horn of sinning. He says instead we stumble.
Mhm.
And I started thinking how important the Trinity was to him. And I started thinking of my students. They're not going to be interested in God, he, God, he, God, he, God, he all the time. So I thought, well, I'll try just not to use pronouns. You cannot not use pronouns, as you know, as an author, Swami. So one morning when I was in the middle of translating this during the height of the pandemic in 2020, I
Mhm.
just laid it to rest. I thought, well, what will I do? I guess I'll just go back to he, because I can't not use any pronouns.
Mhm.
And so I woke up about 5 or 4:30 that morning, and I went up in the room where I was translating. And all of a sudden I thought, you could use they for God. And that
Mhm.
taught me, I'm very humbled by the Spirit giving me that. And again, I'm not saying everybody should use they for God, Swami. I'm just
Mhm.
saying for that book, that was what came to me, even though Brother Lawrence uses he. And I say that in the book.
Yeah.
But it was really freeing to me in that way. And many people have told me they've cried tears of joy encountering that. And many of them are not members of the queer community.
Mhm.
Sometimes they're people who have a grandchild who uses they pronouns. Sometimes it's just people who want a newness, like
Mhm.
a new open, like the evolving, becoming God.
Mhm.
So, so it was a spirit thing, Swami.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And yeah, it reminds me Richard saying things like, in order to know God, we have first to know God. And part of that sometimes is to adjust and know God as we know him through certain specific way of addressing. No? And he will say many times, he was quoting someone else who will say that the word God is so loaded generationally
Yes.
that someone suggested, let's stop using it for 50 years. Let's give the word God a rest. So it recovers its original actual meaning, because we humans have put so much in it. Not like what I saw in the pandemic, when certain, in our particular tradition, there is one sacred, many sacred places, but one particularly in India called Vrindavan, and there is a very sacred river there called Yamuna, which for the last decades and more has been really polluted
Mm.
by us. And after, when the COVID thing started and people was not allowed to be in this outside and so on and so forth, so quickly the river recovered. No? So for me,
Mm.
it gave me this kind of parallel. Okay, let's stop using that word. Let's give the word God a break, and it will quickly recover by its own
Oh,
from
that's beautiful.
all the pollution, so to say, that we have thrown on the top of that beautiful word. But yeah, I appreciate how you have taken that step and you received that humbling epiphany of, okay, let's go for day. In my book, I thought about that, to be honest. I haven't not done in that direction, but many times I try to make clear there's female God, male God, plural God, singular God. Uh,
Hmm.
so gradually we get accustomed to that. And specifically what you mentioned, that I appreciate this idea that God is ever evolving, that I know that you saw a little bit of our conversation, or the whole conversation, sorry, with Brian McLaren. At the last part, we
Hmm.
talked about that. I had another podcast with Elia Delio in that connection as well. And
Hmm.
an ever evolving God needs an ever evolving language to
Hmm.
for us to be able to say something about someone, so to say, who is always two steps ahead of us. It's always
Yes.
unfolding, it's always evolving, as I like to say in my book Radical Personalism. Like, we have to find a way to keep with the pace of with transcendence, so to say. It's just
Mm.
ever evolving, ever unfolding, and it's not only about our own development, spiritual development, but also in terms of language, because language so many times can really craft our experience, basically. The way we use a word, as you were saying, just by saying him to God, that may have triggered some trauma. And it's just a word
Hmm.
that is creating an experience. So sometimes I personally think we underestimate the power of the words we're using and the importance of whether re-explaining them and reclaiming and redeeming them, like you said, did with respect, or sometimes using new words, or sometimes even creating altogether new words for given the necessity of the moment. So yeah, do you have any thoughts in that connection in relation
I do. I do,
to
because
never evolving, always being 2 steps ahead? And anyhow, yeah.
I love, first of all, the image that you used, Richard saying, give God a rest for 50 years, and how you said during the pandemic that river cleared. I love that. And also, I know you are also fond of making new words. I saw online on Instagram where you had cathedral, for cathedral. And I was like, why didn't I think of that? How did
I took that from you? Sorry.
I've adopted that. I think it's a wonderful thing, the cathedral. And one of the things I think about is,
that was a friend of mine, by the way. I took that from her.
Well, tell her I love it.
I will say it. Yeah, all credit.
Please tell her I have been looking for that word my whole life. Literally, I love that. So one of the things I will say is that part of the thing of God always being he for me was the fact that as a woman, I don't see myself there. And people would say, well, there's Mary, the mother of Jesus. But to be honest with you, Mary was scarce in the tradition I was raised in. It was really an all-male cast, divine wise. And as a little girl, I didn't see myself. And if you add to that, that I was told I was sort of lesser than, it's difficult. So that's just something to be aware of. The other thing I will say is that I feel humble about this, in the sense of, if someone else, because remember, I'm a teacher, and as a teacher, that means I listen to each one of my students and what's important to them. Do you know, like, what's important to them is important. Like I need to know what it is. And so one of the things is this notion that somehow somebody is going to make up the idea of how we're going to refer to God, and that's going to be the end of the discussion. Do you know, like the fact that we're going to have a conference and hammer out this new language, when actually it's much more like fractals, like leaves falling from a tree and making these patterns that are ever evolving and infinite. And so what I want to say is, if somebody's way of referring to God is X, Y, Z, A, B, C, I want to know what it is and to respect it. Does that make any sense? Like, to me, that is very, very, very important. And I want to know why. I'm interested in I'm curious to know why they do. And then I find with you, Swami, one of the things I really appreciate is that you say in your book, Radical Personalism, that the goal is for us all to remain students forever. And so that would be even students of learning how to listen, students of learning how to engage with and participate in this relationship with divinity and with each other, which there's really no difference, right? So I am open to learning about this, is the main thing. I do know that curiosity is a very good thing in this respect. Like, and you talk about paradox a lot, and I'm really down with paradox, because often people think, and I used to think, that paradox is just good, evil, this or that. But actually, in my mind, paradox, if I go to the word's roots, it literally means beside and an opinion or seeing, right? In the sense of like, and so it's like this and that and the other and that too and that. So like, how you often talk about, Richard Rohr says that in the title that he came up with for the nonprofit, Center for Action and Contemplation, that the emphasis is on the and. He says that's the most important word. Yeah. And so a paradox is not just two things. It's like this and that and that and that. And so it really requires an openness, which is actually, to be honest with you, it's like you said once, I think it was in your conversation with Brian McLaren, it would be so boring if I had it figured out, or if even it could be figured out. Do you know? Like if I could just say, okay.
Sounds like hell to me.
It sounds like hell. It would be hell on earth. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. In that connection, I like to describe heaven as the opposite, as a place of perpetual curiosity, perpetual discovery, finding, and a constant displacement in a healthy way. No? Like you are never too much in the same place, because it starts to become stagnant. It starts to become hellish in that sense, in the sense of boredom, lack of purpose, lack of meaninglessness. So and I appreciate what you mentioned, and I like to witness your willingness to, when you say someone calls God YZAB, I want to know why. Well, I can think, just unfortunately my head went to people who will say, immediately will judge that and will put you in a label and in a box, and that's crazy, that's weird. Why? Because that's not the way I do it, because you are inviting me to leave my comfort zone to understand you, and I don't want to do that. That's the actual thing. So I appreciate your willingness to displace yourself, in the sense of being willing to enter into, again, you are a translator, so you are accustomed to inhabit those different realms, and I think it's such a healthy life dynamic, to keep that muscle active, and remain always willing to understand and to be curious, and to experience wonder. Of course, that for us is, in our tradition, is such an important word, that somehow is the essence of the active principle of reality. If I want to put it in somewhere, is wonder. We will have that in Sanskrit, chamatkar, that's the word, and that's the essence of the ultimate reality, is an experience of constant wonder. And we will say that, in the ever evolvingness of reality and the ever evolvingness of love, there's one description in our tradition that if a soul loves God, each other will see each other as new at every moment. Again, let's going back to the word respect. No, but literally, it may sound a little extreme, but literally, God and the beloved and the lover will be together, and in separation, after 5 seconds, they will see each other and say, oh, who is that beautiful person? And they say, you have been with him 5 seconds ago. No, it's a totally new person. Each of them have been upgraded by the ever unfoldingness of love. So I really think that that's mandatory if we want to basically inhabit transcendence, because those are the dynamics of eternity, in my opinion, the constant unfolding, and which in itself, of course, as we were saying, if God is ever evolving, ever unfolding, in that sense also, he, she, they, ZABD remain a perpetual mystery at the same time that cannot be fully comprehended, like Richard will beautifully say. It's not that God cannot be understood, but it is that he can be understood endlessly. In that sense, he remains a perpetual mystery, and that somehow brings us, or the conversation, to which I may call maybe the main theme, which is this concept of the cloud of unknowing, which is a book in itself, which has the title, but also in itself it's a concept, it's a reality. So finds place in the Christian mystical tradition, which finds place in our tradition. In the 12th chapter of my book, Radical Personalism, I try to unpack our own version of the cloud of unknowing by talking on divine ignorance and knowing through darkness and doubt and paradox, as you beautifully said. So for me, for a tradition to be mystical, there must be mystery, because the very word mystical is tied to the notion of mystery. So I'd like to invite you, Carmen, please, if you can introduce us a little bit about to the book, The Cloud of Unknowing, to the concept, to the author of the book. So what's all this cloud of unknowing all about?
First, I want to say I love the fact that you center and you describe so well the wonder at the heart of your tradition. The Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
I was just brief. That requires a whole minimum one other.
I know.
There's so much to say about that.
I know it's an unpackable concept and reality and embodied experience. But I really appreciate that you bring that up, because it also takes us, I think, to the center of The Cloud of Unknowing. And I really enjoyed your chapter 12 in Radical Personalism, because you really get to the heart of the cloud there. I mean, I know you're talking about so many other things in relationship to your tradition, but that divine ignorance, the humility in that divine ignorance that makes room for newness and for an openness to be transformed, to really change. So when I started meditating, I was like, dear God, please help me change, please heal me. And I wanted it so desperately, like as in I needed the oxygen of it, like not just, oh, please smooth some edges, but like I need fundamental help, that kind of. And the Cloud of Unknowing often says that contemplation heals you. He talks about, and this is also in the Gospel of Thomas, one of our often called the fifth gospel in the Christian tradition. And I've just finished translating it from the Coptic and from the Greek. Mm-hmm. And in it, the Gospel of Thomas, anonymous author, really talks about wonder. I mean, I really think that mystery is at the heart of Christianity. And when I was being raised, I was always looking for the mystery. Like my mother had mystery. My mother would sit in church and close her eyes before the service started. And I was like, I want that. That presence, the presence that she had of even if life was falling apart, that she, and she showed it throughout her days. It wasn't just in church. But what I mean is I would notice that she was actually there to have it was real for her, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And so the Cloud of Unknowing is from the 14th century in the Christian tradition. It really stems a lot from the 5th and 6th century Neoplatonic Christian or Christian Neoplatonist Dionysius the Areopagite, sometimes called Pseudo-Dionysius, as you so well know. You quote him also in your book. And one of the things that we don't know who wrote it. I mean, I think my favorite author might be anonymous because there are a lot of them. And we think he might have been a Carthusian priest. So maybe some kind of monk or priest or something in the Catholic tradition. And he was well read. He was a meditator, contemplative. He was also a spiritual director. He's a teacher's teacher. So like you, Swami, I think you're a teacher's teacher, and you bring real attention to people. That's an art, a gift, and it's that muscle you talked about. It's working at it also, the exercising that, having intention to do it. And he's very much a teacher's teacher, and he's writing these chapters, like mini letters that comprise the book, to a 24-year-old spiritual companion or directee. Some independent scholars have wondered if it might have been Julianne of Norwich. I think it was a woman. I don't know that we'll ever know who, but he's writing to her just like Dionysius is writing to Timothy, so to speak, to his Timothy in his pseudonym way. But he's talking about how to contemplate. That's it. And he's assuming that his directee will have done Lectio Divina, which is sacred reading in the Catholic tradition, which so many traditions have their form of, where you steep in scripture. Like come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Like really sitting with that, those words of Jesus. And he assumes the person is participating in Lectio Divina, and then he's teaching them different strategies on how to let go and enter into contemplation and then live it out. And then he says, once you try this, God will be your teacher. He will teach you better than me. He says, try things that work for you, and then you come back and teach me. So that's beautiful.
Yeah. I really appreciated that last point. That shows I cannot avoid going, as usual, when I talk members of different traditions, I cannot avoid traveling back, so to say, to my own tradition and finding some parallel in that. So when you are saying,
I love that.
The teacher is telling the student, whatever new you learn, come to me and instruct me about it. In our own tradition, one of our main books that I quote repeatedly in radical personalism is called Srimad-Bhagavatam, and the main, so to say, composer of the book is called Vyasa, which is kind of an archetypal figure in the Hindu canon, in the Hindu tradition, like the very form of the compiler, revealer of divine scripture. And he's teaching that book to his son, Sukadev Goswami. His son has 16 years old and Vyasa is elder. And eventually his son starts to teach that book to someone else. Parikshit, that's his name. And Vyasa, his father and guru and teacher, is sitting listening to his son giving the teaching in ecstasy, like completely captured by that. And not only that, but Vyasa's own guru is also sitting there. So Narada is his name. So the teacher of the teacher is listening to the disciple of his own disciple with this spirit of whenever genuine revelation manifests, whenever the current descends, it doesn't matter if it's younger, elder, who will say that the guru principle has manifested. No, sometimes guru is very much limited to one individual, but ultimately it's about the principle of divine revelation that can flow through an individual, but can flow through a life circumstance, can flow through a tree, through a blade of grass. Ultimately, it's everywhere, but it may take an individual first for us to be educated about how the teacher is everywhere. First, we may need one teacher to realize how the teacher is always everywhere. So, yeah, I really appreciate that.
I love that too, that the teacher is can I just say, I want to applaud that. The teacher is everywhere. I really love that.
And as a teacher yourself, you already mentioned that, Carmen. And I remember when I listened to the podcast you made in Everything Belongs to You, I really was captured by that section, how you, with such natural humility and again, curiosity and wonder, you presented yourself as, in one sense, a student of your own students. So that's another way of calling a teacher. Or like I was recently talking with a rabbi that came to the podcast, and he will call the teacher like a leader learner, so to say. So somehow the teacher is leading the way, is teaching something, but is in one sense the one who has the most capacity to learn also. So that we also will say that, like, for someone to be a guru or a teacher, you have to be able to learn more than probably your students have the capacity to learn. So that's what makes you a teacher. Not so much only your capacity to teach, but your capacity to learn. And if you have that capacity, you may be probably learning more from your student than what the student may be capable of learning from the teacher yet. So
that's beautiful.
As a teacher yourself, we'll go back for a minute. This is a brief detour, but we'll go back to in a minute to the cloud of unknowing. How do you invite your own students, as we will talk in these days, quoting Rilke, to leave the questions? How as in our tradition, we'll say the guru will not give predictable answers, but many times will offer newly discovered questions. No, so the proper teacher will probably, instead of bringing closure, will constantly bring disclosure, further disclosure. You know, like answers being like bridges. Further questions. That's how I like to think about answers. An answer is a bridge to a further question, and so on, to keep us in that student forever spirit. So what do you have to say in your own life as a teacher in that connection?
I am always asking that question, and especially this month when we start school again in August. I'm always asking the universe, God, Jesus, all the ancestors, how can I help my students to know that I really mean it when I say, I'm going to teach you, you're going to teach me, we're going to respect each other. So for me, I would guess one of the things I have to balance against this encouraging them to question and giving them space to discover is also giving them a safe framework where they feel they know what's expected. So you kind of have this, it's really like being a translator again. You have these competing interests. You have what the school expects you to teach and is good that it's taught. And also helping students know how their grade is made, which is important. And then also making space within that to center the student. So this is one thing I really related to in your Radical Personalism book. You talk about really paying attention to the person. I mean, this is of utmost importance to me, that I don't teach a subject, I teach a student. Do you know? I mean, it's a different emphasis, and that means that I really need them to feel that I see them, that I value them, that I respect them, that I don't judge them by their youth. I do not think. I don't judge them by. So there are all these stereotypes that could possibly kick into place. And we talk about this in my classes. I'm like, I don't judge you by what you do, what you participate in on campus, how old you are, your background. I judge you on judge in the sense of like, I listen to you on what you tell me. Like, what do you want me to know? And what are you interested in? And then the other thing is, I want to convince them that I want them to succeed. And I am there as the teacher to facilitate that. And I tell them, I'm a student like you. I'm just older student. Like literally, I expect you to teach me. And they do. And sometimes it's like things like Ngram. You know, the website Ngram? No. I didn't either. A few years ago, I was teaching, and I don't know why it was a student who was a multilingual student from another country. And they said very shyly, like students will do, like they could not teach the teacher anything. But they took me seriously, and he came to me and he said very shyly with his laptop, have you seen this website? I'm like, what is that? It was Ngram. And it's where you can find out the popularity of word, like the use of words, like it's like this big database, and you can follow over the centuries words that come in and out of fashion. And I was like, how did you discover this? And I tell this story all the time. I wish I could remember the name of the student, but I, in my heart, bow to this student very regularly. And that's just Swami, one example. Students know about AI. They know about fast fashion. They know about climate crisis. They know about, they know so much, you know, so much. Yeah.
I'm writing the link now, ingram.com, I imagine it may be.
Yeah, I'm not even sure, but if you just put in Ngram, because I have it, what do you call it? Bookmarked on my computer. So all I have to do is click, click one spot. Yeah.
I do the same. Yeah.
I use it all the time.
Yeah. Incredible resource. I didn't know about it either. So now I'm bowing down to you for teaching me that link. Thank you so much, Carmen.
Yeah.
Going back to, we never left the topic, but in connection to the cloud of unknowing and the world of mystery and God as in our tradition, we'll even call him Ganashyam, which means, I think I told you, like dark cloud. So that's very, very close to cloud of unknowing. Of course, naturally, the notion of faith comes to the table, because if God is in one sense a mystery, in the sense that he can be or she can be, they can be endlessly comprehended, the means to embrace the journey in one sense is faith, and faith in itself has to do with coexisting with mystery in a way that we can survive the mystery, so to say, that we can survive the intensity of reality, that we can survive everything, and not only mere survival, of course. And as I like to think, like very true faith is like it's very tied, as Richard will teach also, to the idea of uncertainty and coexisting with that. No? He will very famously say the opposite of faith is certainty, which is a genius-like definition. So therefore, I think, okay, faith has to be an openness to different layers of uncertainty, like territories to be charted, uncharted territories that are inviting me to discover them. So, and I will say that if we don't take that stance, if we don't embrace properly uncertainty, we cannot know unlimitedly. No? So the openness to uncertainty opens the door to an unlimited potential. And many times when we just go for certainty, we don't want to know anything about any unknowing, cloud of unknowing, any cloudy thing that want just direct light, shiny, everything clear and certain. We lose so much potential, so much nuanced. And there is so much fear behind that, no? Because sometimes certainty is tricky, can look so courageous. I'm very certain of everything, and I will talk in a very opinionated way. But many times behind that certainty, there's so much fear in terms of exploring, again, what lies outside of the comfort zone in the liminal space. So anyhow, I'm just thinking in loud voice what real faith in terms of uncertainty should be, and like patience with mystery. No, that's what faith is about, at least for me. Like being with mystery enough, coexisting, as Rilke will say, coexist with the questions, and they gradually will blossom into an answer. So coexist with mystery, be patient. And patience, again, not as merely waiting for something magic to happen, but the willingness to coexist with that which I cannot control, while I, at the same time, I deeply trusting that, which again, it puts us in a very interesting and paradoxical stage, because generally, if we cannot control something, we tend to distrust that extremely. So how to deeply trust what lies beyond my control? And anyhow, that's what's coming at this precise moment. If you have anything to share in that connection.
So much. That's so rich, Swami. And one of the things that I appreciate that we have this, it's like when you said you had Ilia Delio on, and she said she thought she might be, she said, Hindu, right? Or something along. How did she put it exactly?
I think I'm a Hindu. I think I'm a Hindu, she said.
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same, because when you say in your tradition, you have the dark cloud, and in the Greek that Dionysius writes, that the cloud of unknowing author is using as his beloved source. In the Greek, it's nophos. So it's a Greek word, Gnophos, and it literally means a dark storm cloud. And that's the cloud of unknowing. Now, when I see a storm cloud coming, obviously, if one is out in it and there's no chance for shelter, it can be just really fearful. But if you can even get under a bridge, or if you're in a building somewhere, and especially if you're sitting somewhere and you have a cup of tea and you know it's not going to be too bad, there's an awe there. There's really an awe with a storm cloud. And you know you didn't make this storm cloud, and you know you can't control this storm cloud, and it's part of a greater mystery that brings rain. If you know, in Georgia, where I grew up, when we would have storm clouds in the summer, you were so grateful because it cooled everything off. You know, the roads would steam afterwards. And I've had students who came from other countries, where one student, I remember, she said, it never rained where I grew up. She said, and when it would rain, we would go out in the streets and dance in it. And so there's that notion of the storm cloud. The cloud of unknowing is this dark cloud we can't see through. So when we think about it, if we thought we could be certain about God, that's just a reflection of our own ego. And in the end, it's kind of a dead end. And like you said, Richard Rohr says that you can know God endlessly. So it's like this knowing, this endless knowing and unknowing simultaneously. And one of the things that the cloud of unknowing does, I think, so beautifully is he invites us into practice that helps us become more trusting of this experience of mystery. So at the very beginning, I do think it's true. There's a feeling of like, wait, I want my control back. You know, when you're practicing contemplation, maybe at the first, like whether it's Brother Lawrence's returning to love, his practice of the presence, or whether it's sitting somewhere for 15 minutes and letting go after Lectio Divina, or whatever kind of meditation it is. At the beginning of starting this practice, which for me was many decades ago, it's like, did anything happen? What's happening? can I analyze what's happening? You know, and there are all these thoughts of like, this doesn't compute with I'm not going to make an A on this. You know, it's like something's not right here. And then the more that you participate in the practice, and this is what he encourages his student, he says, at first it's difficult, but just keep returning to this practice of contemplation, and then it will become clearer. And it really is like, can I just make a really interesting analogy? Because I know, Swami, you make analogies like this. It's really like when you first have a baby and they hand you this baby, and you've read all the books about babies and changing diapers and things like that, but then actually you start to do it and the baby doesn't behave at all like in the book. And so there's this experience of always sort of unlearning what you thought you knew and trying to take care of this baby, and then eventually sort of kind of trusting the process of like, okay, I'm doing my best. And so, and then it's like, wait, there's a relationship here. And so it goes from being this impersonal, and I know you talk a lot about that in your book, this impersonal versus personal. It goes from being this impersonal experience to this mysterious personal experience that you cannot put into words. And that's what I love about it. And you know, this is what I love about the book of Job in the Hebrew Bible, in the Christian Old Testament. In the book of Job, Job has done everything right. And when I was growing up, I was told that Job was patient. And when I started in graduate school reading the whole Bible and studying it with commentaries so I could know for myself what the Bible said, the Christian Bible, I realized Job was not patient, and I loved him more because Job had done everything right. He was a faithful man. He was wealthy. He had, you know, family. He had lands. He had cattle. And the devil comes to Satan, the adversary comes to God and says, you know, that Job, your servant, he's only your servant because he's got it good. Let me take everything away from him and you'll see. And so God goes, okay. And so, I mean, and it's poetry in the Hebrew Bible. It's beautiful poetry. And so that happens. And then Job starts to grieve and mourn. His family dies. He loses all of his lands, and he's covered in sores, and he starts lamenting. And he curses God, and he says, why? I did everything right. And his friends come to him, and Swami, these are not the friends, as you know, that you want visiting you when you're having a hard time. His friends come to him and tell him all the things he did wrong and all that. And then eventually God comes to him and says, where were you when I created the heavens and the earth? Where were you when and it's this really beautiful poetry on where were you when I did all of this mysterious creation that's, and Job goes, well, before I just, and you say this in your book, Job says in essence, before I knew about you, now I know you. In other words, he's had this personal experience. And Richard Rohr talks about this a lot. It doesn't mean sometimes we're not grieved in the darkness, the dark night of the soul. It doesn't mean sometimes we don't know which end is up. But it does mean we have this ongoing relationship that we are committed to. As Jim Finley says from the Center of Action and Contemplation, James Finley, as Jim says, we have fidelity to the rendezvous of the practice. And we hold on to it for all we're worth and try to be open to it changing, but that we return to it. So that's my thoughts on that very mysterious topic.
Thank you. I appreciate many things you say, one of them being that the fact that we may have a mysterious experience with God, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily something impersonal. Because a few times I've heard people thinking, what's all that mysterious thing? And especially I will say that as a constructive, loving criticism to my own tradition, as you may eventually read in my book, which is in part a long, big criticism to certain ways in which members of my own tradition conceive and present and live the tradition. And in our particular tradition, we have lots of detailed descriptions about God and who God is and what's his different details that to be honest, by comparative study, I haven't found them in other traditions. And by this, I'm not saying we are better or anything like that. I'm just saying that's what I found in my own research. But of course, that can lead to a very subtle thing, because you can end up in this place of certainty thinking, okay, I know everything about God. I know all these details about his private life, even the name of the earrings he's using. So many details. I won't enter into the details here. So that can give this type of superiority complex and comfort zone, basically, and complacency in terms of we know so much. So what's that all that talk about mystery? If we have all the detailed thing, the more personal thing. But I appreciate the point you made that mystery is not necessarily an impersonal encounter with the divine, but actually is very personal. In one sense, we could say so personal that it cannot be put into words, and it has to remain a mystery in that sense. And our own tradition says that a lot also. There are many lines which says, in connection to God, there is nothing to be said, or you can never say enough. You try, it says, you try your best, say as much as you can. Words are for that, but still you will reach a point where also silence is probably the last alternative, last resource. No, and interestingly, in one of our main treatises, the Bhagavad Gita, which it is said to be spoken by God himself, he says there, of all, how does he say, of all secrets, I am silence. No? So I really appreciate that particular. There's a section where he's saying, of this I am this, of this I am that, of all bodies of water I am the ocean, of the animals he compares himself with the most prominent example of any particular area, so to say. And when he says of all the secrets I am silence. No, so for us, basically silence is non-different from the divine, and that's that meeting point with secrecy, so to say, where words do not suffice, and we have to enter into mystery, basically, right? So, yeah, that's what came from what you shared. Thank you. And in this connection, I have one quote. I like to share a few quotes. You have a few more minutes, Carmen, or no rush?
Of course.
Thank you.
I'm enjoying this so much, Swami.
Thank you. As I like to say sometimes to my friends when we are talking, I ask them, do you have a few more minutes? And I well, actually, we have eternity on our side. Eternity is supporting us. So, yeah. So one quote, which is, I'll share a few quotes, which are the ones that I really love, to the point that I quoted them in my own book. So one of them is where the anonymous author says, I am willing to abandon everything I know to love the one thing I cannot think, referring to God. He can be loved, but not thought. So he says he cannot be thought, and I'm about to ask you if you have any thoughts on this. so sorry to go there, but yeah, I like to hear what you have to say. This reminds me of Saint Augustine. I think he also says,
yes,
if you understand it, then it is not God. Or like Richard will call Buddhist monks saying, don't plunder the mystery with concepts. And I like to quote, I quoted in my book John Bonhoeffer when he says, not only we don't have to plunder the mystery, we have to preserve the mystery as mystery. That's the role of theology. I really love that way of putting it. Our duty, our role is to preserve the mystery for what it is. And anyhow, what comes to my mind in this moment, just one thought, and I allow you to share your gifts. But preserving the mystery that God is, for me also many things it means, but one of them will be, if God is mystery, is ever unfolding, evolving mystery, that means to preserve the mystery means to allow him to be more in us than what we think he already is, so to say. Like we have an idea of who God is and who God is for us in our lives, but he's much more than that, and he wants to be way more than that. But also we have to participate in the relationship, allowing that to happen. And that's for us becoming the divine is perpetual mystery, and preserving the mystery means preserving the openness and allowing him to be all that he can be, and again, let go of layers of God, like Mr. Eckhart will say, God rid me of God. Like, wait, this previous conception I had, this is outdated. Let's embrace a new, more profound, more deep. In that connection, I like sometimes to say that I define myself as a theistic agnostic. Not because the agnostic is the one who says, I don't know. So in one sense, I know I'm
I like
theistic.
that.
I have experience of God, but at the same time, I cannot say I know God, because it's here to say he can be loved but not thought. So I know him, but I don't know him. So in that sense, there is some form of agnosticism that keeps me preserving the mystery. So anyhow, some thoughts if you had to share in this connection, or maybe hopefully not only thoughts, but something coming even deeper from the thinking platform.
Yes, I would say definitely that I appreciate, first of all, that you draw us to the silence. Like John of the Cross, I've heard you speak of this before too, but John of the Cross in the Christian tradition says, you know, God's first language is silence. So I really appreciate that. And the other thing I would say, when the Cloud of Unknowing author says, you know, God can be loved but not thought. Well, what does that actually mean? Do you know, like I really, it's when you say how Rilke says, live the questions now. What does that statement mean? So the first thing I think of is how many people are hungry today? How many people in the world are really hungry? Where are the wars? What people are suffering in war? And so what am I meant to be as a human being in a world where God can be loved but not thought? So I can get all my thoughts together in a certain particular quote unquote beautiful way. But what does that mean for me being a human in a world of suffering? And how can I be a small contributor to that? And what does it mean that God is silence? For me, it's when I was a little child experiencing trauma and I would go out into nature and something met me there. Something, someone, that theistic, agnostic that you're talking about. I love that, because before I even had a word for it, of course, I'd not heard of mystics. I'd not heard of much of anything, you know, as a kid. But there I was met by love. It was wordless. I can't explain it. It's a gift. And so it's not like I had to put words for it. It's not like I had to think of the right. Now, the concepts and words are useful and they can be tools, but they are not God. So there's that aspect of it. And then the other one is, who are you more quiet with? Are you more quiet with your really close friends or with your acquaintances? I would dare say it is our close friends, our most intimates, that we can have silence with. And when two people are in a loving relationship and when they experience making love, it's not the words that matter. It's the intimacy. And so silence, to my mind, is the language of intimacy and doing. So and it's also the quiet doing that, you know, in the Christian Bible, it says, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. So it's those acts of love that are meant to be part of coming out of this silence. And so to me, when you ask that question, what does it mean? And you're right. When you referring us back to Augustine, it goes so far back in the Christian tradition. But what does that mean? That's actually very more valuable to me as a question than it is any answer that I could try to create. I ask that of myself every day. How am I meant to be kind and wise? Because I don't think I'm naturally wise in the sense of like I'm so learning so much. And anybody who thinks they're keeping up in a world of AI and different I just, you know, it's a lot. And so every day I'm asking, how can I be kind wherever I am? And that's enough of a challenge. You know what I'm saying? Like just trying to be kind to everyone you meet when when the wheels are coming off in so many ways. So So that is my prayer, that I will hopefully know God more by love, not by thoughts.
Beautiful. And the point you made, knowing God by love and not by thoughts, again, I cannot avoid referring to my tradition in my mind, because for us, we really try to make the point that the actual ultimate knowing is through love. And as you were mentioning, different moments of deep intimacy and connection where there are no words, there is no knowledge, so to say, there is silence and there is love, but there is knowing, that there is a deeper knowing in our own tradition. When love is described, again, going back to the Bhagavad Gita for a moment, love is described as Raja Vidya, which basically means the king of knowledge. So love is the king of knowledge. No? So if you love someone, you know the person, you know what to do, you know what's going on. As you mentioned, no words are not necessary. Everything becomes intuitive. Love itself translates the whole situation and instructs the players to know what to do in anticipation. And for me, comes again, I cannot avoid thinking about that's probably because I'm writing this book on the topic of ever evolvingness. So the nature of love is ever evolving. So if I can know God by loving God, and love is ever evolving in one sense, I can always love God more and more, and therefore I can always know God more and more, and therefore there's no end point for me to loving God, and there's no end point for me to knowing God. And in that sense, He remains the mystery that He is. Basically, even in our tradition, we'll say, and that may be something quite unique, but we'll say God is not omniscient in the sense of His own ever-evolving love is unlimited, so you cannot know something which has no limits, basically. So God Himself doesn't know His own limits because He doesn't have any limits. So in one sense, He Himself remains a mystery unto Himself, we will say, in a very fine theological point. But yeah, I appreciate the point you made on paralleling knowing God by loving God, and ultimately that it all boils down to love as the ultimate form of knowledge. There's one quote, I have another quote, if you allow me, from the cloud that says, it's an adaptation that I made in my book. It says, it's ironic that the topic we most want to discuss leaves us speechless. It is a topic that gives us a boundless joy, but which also teaches us a humble economy of words. That's great. That's genius-like. Incredible. I mean, that's genius-like for you for translating that in that particular way. You know, that you are in between those lines as well. So thank you for that. Do you have any thoughts in that connection? Of course, it's connected to what we are talking, and it brings me to the idea of humility also. No? Like when you're witnessing the boundlessness of the mystery, there are no words. Then we can talk about this notion of apophatic method or tradition, like unsaying God.
I really like this because it reminds me of what you write about in your radical personalism. You talk about, sing your own song. And then you've also said elsewhere that you're not interested in a God that doesn't dance, and that in your own tradition, God dances. And I really like that because, for us, what we come close to that with is Jesus at the wedding feast, turning water into wine. It's like, let's eat, let's drink. It's that notion, yes, celebrating, and it's embodied, and it's together. It's not one person singing and the rest are backups. It's everybody's in the band together singing. Everybody belongs. And I love this part. It reminds me also how in your book, Radical Personalism, you talk about the difference between fitting in and belonging. And you relate that to longing, which always I do in my mind. I always think we have this innate longing, and that's what really motivates us to want to belong. And we need mystery for that. We are designed We are not designed for certainty. That's the thing I have actually come to realize, is that we're designed to discover our own song, to try to discover the bravery to sing it, and then to really discover how we can belong. And in my experience, belonging sometimes means also saying, wait, I don't like this part of my tradition. This hurt me. And that takes bravery to be able to say, I would like to share about this. And I love this part of the tradition. And trying to make this newness. My husband and daughter and I, when she was really little, went to Hawaii, and we saw a volcano erupting very gently. And so you could go there and stand next to it. And the experience of seeing lava becoming new ground was life-changing for me. And that, to me, is the heart of any tradition that is staying alive, is that it has this erupting of lava that is a very, like, I remember we were there and they were filming a commercial, believe it or not. And one of the graduate students from a nearby university jumped over one of the lava tubes, which you just would not. So in other words, it's a dangerous thing to, this thing of new land is something to really respect. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I'm very humbled by all of this conversation that we've been having, which I so appreciate. And I value so much, Swami, how you're so kind. I mean, I love the forward to your book by your friend Pranada, right? Where she says, and you even say someone had called you a radical personalist. And that's where, and I really love this emphasis on we need each other. That's the basic thing of what I hear you saying. We need each other, and we are all divine. We are made by love in that sense. And if we could just slow down and appreciate each other more, we don't need to know lots of theology. Even we just need to find what works for us in the tradition.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I totally resonate with your mentioning, and absolutely on that same page, same line, same word, same letter that you're mentioning. Especially what you are mentioning at the end of, we are all in this together. We need each other. I mean, I've repeated that quote so many times in my lectures, maybe in my book a little bit, but throughout my presentation, that's one of my main one-liners, like, we need each other. That's humbling, that's empowering, that requires vulnerability, that requires, openness to welcome those that we don't want to be part of our tribe, but to understand there's no separate existence. Now, our tradition, like any mystical tradition, is a non-dual tradition. So it acknowledges that there's no second separate reality, no isolated bubble. So everything is, as Richard will put it in so beautiful words, everything belongs. There's no better word to say that. We have in Sanskrit this line, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which basically means there's only one family. No?
That's beautiful.
That's the line. The moment you start to think in terms of two families, you start to become a public danger. So
will you say that again in the original?
Yeah, in Sanskrit is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
That's
basically
poetry.
means that. Yeah, means there's only one family.
I love that. That reminds me so much of Ubuntu. You know, I am because you are, or I am because we are. I've never heard that before, Swami. It's beautiful.
Like a friend that recently put this, since we love play of words, she say, what's the difference between, you will love this one, if you don't know it yet, probably you already know it, but she says, what's the difference between illness and wellness?
I don't know.
One starts with I, the other starts with we.
Oh, I've never heard that. I really like that.
That's a good one.
I really am for this we thing. I am really, you know, I love that. I'm going to mention that, and I'll quote you and your friend.
That's okay. Yeah, because the we doesn't cancel the you and the I. It's just a
Yeah.
dynamic. It's a dynamic union of the two of us. So
No.
the two of us become one in a
Yeah.
dynamic sense that preserves our individuality and our individuation, but at
Oh,
the
I
same
love
time,
that.
yeah, yeah.
I
And
love
of
the
course,
fact that you're saying it doesn't cancel out the I either. It's becoming together. Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, I think we need so much of this type of language and emphasis. In our particular tradition, we have a main spiritual practice. There are many, but one that is really emphasizes like singing together songs of praise for God. Let's put it that way. No? Like praising God through music and celebration. Again, as you were talking before, celebrating life, like dancing, singing. We already talked, God for us is a dancer, but even in one of our main texts, what we will call the spiritual world, you can call it heaven, it is described as at that place, every step is a dance and every word is a song. No?
Mm.
So that's how it is described, the dynamics, the eternal dynamics. Every step is a dance, every word is a song. And one commentator very nicely says, if every step is a dance, what must be when they actually are dancing? No? So how celebratory is that movement? No,
Wow.
how exuberant and full of harmony. So yeah, and I was saying
I
that
love
our
it.
main practice of us is called in Sanskrit Sankirtan, which refers
Mm.
to congregational praise of God. And
Mm.
the very word Sankirtan, kirtan refers basically to praise God through song and so on, poetry. And Sam means, uh, in this case, all. So implying
Mm.
like all together. We cannot engage in that practice by ourselves. That's a very
Mhm.
definition of the word. If you want to engage in Sankirtan, you need to, we need each other. Again, we need each other to engage in that most important practice, implying the most important way to approach and relate to the divine.
Mm.
Somehow or other implies how we are relating with each other. For us, our relationship with God needs to be reflected and will be reflected in how we are relating to each other,
Mhm.
and vice versa. No, there is no escape from that. No? It's not that I
Yeah.
love God, but then I always love to quote Dorothy Day in that connection, this quote that I read recently and I almost fell to the ground, that she says, I only love God as much as I love the person I love the
Mm.
least. And I was like, wow, that's humbling just to witness those words and to, yeah.
I have
But
to say, I only love God as much as I love the person I love the least. When I first read that by Dorothy Day, and then knowing how she lived,
yeah.
with inviting the poor, those having difficulties in a day before there was anything like that, I am amazed by it. It is a profound and humbling
Yeah. Yeah.
idea to try to live by.
Yeah. And as you said, she walked her talk. So even
Yeah,
you don't know about her, you read the quote and it has its own inherent power because
yeah,
it's coming from the mouth and from the heart of someone
yeah,
who is really meaning that, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Carmen, before wrapping up and closing the curtain and putting our conversation to rest, one more quote, if you allow me, from the Cloud of Unknowing, and I would like
Mm,
to ask you a few words
sure.
on that, which is another one that I really like. There are so many, and this one also I quoted in my book. And there the author says, your patience in sickness and in dealing with different kinds of problems pleases God even more than the keenest devotion in times of good health.
Hmm.
So, and in that connection, I think he mentions also that God always provides one of two things, right? Either an abundance of what you need, or the physical stamina and spiritual patience to endure its absence. So, I'm thinking, and you already shared some sections from the Bible, and I can think of sections of my own tradition where God is taking everything from once the devotee or providing. In our tradition, we have many quotes where God is preserving what you have, providing what you need, or taking away what you don't need to have. Depending the case, He will do the treatment. But in particular to that first quote, like your patience in sickness, or by sickness, I could extend in suffering and pain and difficulty and trauma. pleases God more on that. And I'm thinking we are talking about mystery, the cloud of unknowing, God as in one way as darkness, and how to embrace the dark Lord, so to say. Also, we are invited to embrace our own darkness. And from the podcast I heard, when I get to know you more in detail, you also shared on some level some of your, let's call it, intense chapters in life, or complex chapters, to say the least. So by going through that, and by having redeemed at least a considerable quantity for what I can witness, that past chapter of your life, how do we understand this notion of pleasing God through patience in sickness, darkness, problems, trauma, so on and so forth, like on a more personal note in your own life journey?
That is such a meaty question. I guess this is one place that I especially appreciate my Buddhist friends, who very much are taught that suffering is a part of life. And, in the tradition I was raised in, often if you were having a hard time, it was like, you need to pray more, you need to give more, all the things where you were somehow substandard, like you weren't. And I remember thinking at the time, I pray a lot. As a kid, I had that kind of a heart. I just, some people are just born that way. And it doesn't mean you're better or anything. It's just you have this sensibility that you want to see everything. It's just a thing, And I had illness my entire life. First of all, of dyslexia, and not knowing I had it until my late 40s, but not being able to read and feeling dumb, and and then also until I would say the past 10 years, just decades of depression, chronic depression. And I read the Bible 3 times with commentaries, and it did not heal me. And I went to counseling two different states, 2 different counselors, and really got some help that way also. So for me, I can honestly say that is one of my favorite passages. And all of my favorite ancestors, like Brother Lawrence, others, they went through the dark night of the soul. And they found that they were never left alone, even during the times, as Brother Lawrence describes it, when he would pray and felt like nothing was happening. He was still, he came to realize that he was never alone. And that's what I came to realize, is that I was never alone, ever. And that to me has been that love was always there. And, I was almost raised where if you were having a hard time in your life, you had caused it somehow in some way. And, sometimes, as my friend, I've heard Mirabai Starr say, shit happens. I mean, sometimes life is real and really difficult. And life can be so hard, for so many people. During the pandemic, I had so many students who lost family members. Do you know? I mean, there's so much suffering around even just the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I think not only is God love and is there for us, but like we are love for each other. We are the love of God for each other. And my prayer is that we learn how to show up in that way for each other, so that we become God to each other on earth. And I know it's not easy, but that we be kinder to ourselves, and that we can somehow find ways to be kinder to each other. And so I remember during the worst of my depression in my 30s, I actually prayed to God and said, please don't let me waste this illness. Please help me to treat this as a cell, as a place where I can learn to pray. So I turned it into that. I said, I don't know what that would mean. I'm very confused. Some of my favorite prayers with God are things like this. What is going on? I'm very confused. Or just, I'm grateful. Thank you. But in those times, I was led to deepen prayer, even when it didn't seem to be succeeding.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really grateful for that gift. I will always be grateful for that gift until my dying day.
Amen. Thank you. Beautiful. And gives so much hope and clarity, and gives permission, hopefully, to the ones who are listening to this conversation to, as you say, I may be suffering, I may be going through a hard time, and I have to acknowledge that, and I may even address God with bewilderment and ask him, her, they, what's going on? This is too much. Why? And allow myself to even not feel nothing during prayer, but as you say, trying to hopefully contact that foundational presence that remains there, that is always there. Not like always, like this famous prayer by Thomas Merton when he says that I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. No, so to have this like deeper, it comes to my mind Harry now, and when he will say, God's unconditional love is the only certainty we have. Everything else is uncertain. But by having that certainty in place, everything else can remain uncertain. No problem. We'll survive that huge degree of uncertainty by having very much a clear picture and connection with that only certainty, which is, again, God's unconditional love, presence always being there. So thank you. Thank you.
That's beautiful.
So, yeah. So if you agree, maybe we can, reaching this beautiful point, put the conversation to rest. But of course, before that, I like to invite you, and you already extended the portal, the possibility for you to share with us a very unique prayer. If I'm not mistaken, is the opening prayer, the cloud of unknowing. If you would like to say a few words about what's the prayer about and what you will be sharing.
Thank you,
Yes,
Swami. I want to first say thank you so much for inviting me here today. This kind of dialogue between traditions is very important to me. And thank you for your kindness, for your curiosity, and for the way you listen so deeply. Thank you so much, Swami. I just want to thank you again. And I want everyone to see that I have marked up your book so much already. So I'm going to read this prayer. This is the opening prayer to the Cloud of Unknowing. I'm going to read it in the modern English, which is my translation. This is from this one. God, to you all hearts are open. The reason, by the way, I read it in the modern English and read it, even though I haven't memorized, is sometimes I switch to the Middle English and it gets confused in my mind. So, God, to you all hearts are open. To you all longings speak. And to you no secret thing is hidden. I beg you, purify the intentions of my heart through the unspeakable gift of your grace, so I can love you with all I am and praise you for all you are. Amen. And I know you talk about bhakti a lot in your tradition. And one of the things I've done is go for walks. And that has really been a form of meditation for me, in addition to other forms. And I would read this in the Middle English on a card. And over time, a melody came just somehow. And so this is the prayer in the original Middle English from the 14th century from Anonymous, and it opens the Cloud of Unknowing. And I've sung it for decades. God, unto whom alle Härte span upon, and unto whom alle Wille speaketh, and unto whom no private thing is hid. He beseecheth they so for to cleanse the intent of mine heart with the unspeakable gift of the grace, that he may perfectly loveth they, and worthily praiseth they. Amen.
You are not only a wonderful translator, wonderful soul, wonderful scholar and speaker, but such a beautiful voice, such a beautiful melody. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Swami.
Of course, I always appreciate the recitation in elder languages, so to say. It brings so much more depth to the conversation. So yeah, thank you so much, Carmen. I don't know if you have any last words, concluding words you would like to shower upon us, to one last blessing, although your singing was for me the perfect closing, but if there's anything else that wants to come for you.
Well, my heart is full of gratitude for you, Swami, for those listening to our conversation. And I'm full of gratitude that we can have this conversation. I think conversations are sacred. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Once again, deep pleasure. Thank you all for tuning in to the Free Radical podcast, and especially for our conversation with Carmen. Very enriching, very deep, very profound, very intimate, familiar, sweet. So I hope you were able to receive all these particular unique qualities that touch my heart. So again, if you enjoyed the conversation, please support us by subscribing, by clicking the bell, and your likes, shares, comments helps us to continue unfolding these important discussions and conversations. And as usually, as I like to always say, if you feel some sort of form of indebtedness and some desire to pay back to whatever you have received today, the best way to pay back is by paying forward. So not only by sharing the episode, by sharing the good news, but especially by trying to embody and incarnate whatever values and lessons you have received today, trying to commit yourself to take them into your life, extend them to others, and in that way continue to be a unit of blessing in this world, in this planet. Thank you so much, and see you in 2 weeks for our next episode of the Free Radical podcast.